You're listening to the Sustainable Angler, and my daddy's the host.
All right, well, special thanks to my sweetheart for the introduction, and welcome to the Sustainable Angler, the podcast where we discuss the intersection of fishing, conservation, and sustainability. I'm your host, Rick Crawford. Today's episode is all about public lands, which are near and dear to me because I'm lucky to have spent many days and weeks camping, hiking, and fly fishing on public lands. Public lands provide all Americans with a place to connect deeply with nature, inspire us with their beauty, and have the power to transform us. Public lands are also the foundation of our $1.2 trillion outdoor recreation economy, supporting millions of jobs and countless communities. Our public lands are our legacy, and they are currently being threatened by our lawmakers who want to sell our public lands to balance the budget, which is why I'm thrilled to interview conservation leader and public lands advocate Tawney. We talk about how land got into conservation, the value of our public lands for clean water and air, in addition to the spiritual connections that are made on public lands. We dive deep into the history of conservation in America and the threats they face today. We also dive into the most effective ways to get your voice heard by lawmakers and much more. You won't want to miss Land's important message in today's episode. To listen to previous episodes of The Sustainable Angler, visit emergerstrategies.com/podcast. And if you like what you're hearing, an absolutely free way to show your support is by leaving it a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. The Sustainable Angler is available anywhere you listen to podcasts and is also airing Saturdays at 2 p.m. on Charleston's first and only community-supported radio station, Ohm Radio, 96.3 FM. This episode of the Sustainable Angler podcast is brought to you by Emerger Strategies and a New Earth Project, the sustainability initiative of Atlantic Packaging.
We set out with a New Earth Project to really start a movement.
It's a global coalition of people who are deeply concerned and want to accelerate the transition away from problematic packaging to more sustainable solutions.
Our entire value proposition was built on helping companies package things better. We were doing sustainability before sustainability was cool. We just called it packaging optimization. And packaging optimization really is about using less. And we built our whole business on that. You know, people send us their products, their goods, and we help them design packaging systems and solutions for the least possible cost, utilizing the least amount of material. Use less is always the right answer.
And that's what I see with companies like a New Earth Project is it's like we're just trying to create solutions for big companies and small, that makes it easier for them, cheaper for them, whatever it is, and then has less impact. Not just trying to tell people you should have less impact and making the choice forced on them. Like, make it better for everybody, and it'll make it better for the whole world.
We see the problem, and we are with you.
Fly fishing taught me that learning to read a river for trout isn't just about finding fish. It's about understanding an entire ecosystem. At Emerger Strategies, we see this as a perfect metaphor for systems thinking. Each element of the river, from water quality and habitat to the aquatic insects that transform from emergers to adult mayflies, plays a crucial role. And we understand that businesses also play a critical role in the health of the planet. Measuring and improving your company's sustainability performance is the same as protecting your home waters. And responsible business practices ensure that our rivers remain clean, habitats are preserved, and biodiversity thrives for generations to come. Because when you protect what you love, you're not just protecting the planet, you're building a brand that stands for something. At Emerger Strategies, we help your business apply this holistic approach. By integrating sustainability, you not only conserve natural resources, but also create a thriving ecosystem for your business and the planet that you love. Visit our website at emergerstrategies.com to learn more, and let's protect what we love together.
Thanks for having me, Tawney. I am the co-chair of American Hunters and Anglers. I've spent 25 years now, which makes me feel really old. I turned 50 this last week. So, I've spent half of my life working on conservation, and couldn't be more proud of the work that I've done with so many people across the country, whether that's like here in Montana or in Washington, D.C., and everything in between. So great to be on the podcast, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So, Land, how we're going to talk about a very relevant and current topic here shortly, but before we get into that, how did you? I'm curious to know how you got interested in conservation. Was there like a single moment or something that like was the aha moment for you where you're like, I gotta do whatever I can to protect what I love?
It's a great question. So my parents were major conservationists. And so, they were the first full-time conservation lobbyists at the state legislature here in Montana. So think about that back in like the 70s. And then my dad went on to law school after that. He was the first lawyer for the Elk Foundation. And so when they first started, he wrote their articles of incorporation, their bylaws. He was their lawyer until 1995 when he passed away, unfortunately. And but my mom's still really involved in conservation. And so it always was a part of my life. But I will say that, you ask about the moment, and I don't, I can't really pin it down. Maybe I can, but my father passed away when I was 19 years old, and I was going to school out in Seattle, chasing girls, having a great time. And then it was kind of like reality hit, and I came back home, and I ended up going to the University of Montana and getting a wildlife biology degree. But about a month before I did that, I was going home late at night, and I live out of town a little bit. And I was going home about 2:00 in the morning, and this mountain lion ran across in front of me in the morning. And I could remember that predator, and that just like apex predator. And that mountain lion glided across the road, right? Like its shoulders didn't even move. It was just kind of like stalking across the road. And then it stopped. And then it walked across again in front of me, in front of my lights. And I think that is probably the moment where I was like, man, I really care about this stuff. And my parents have been doing this whole time. It was more probably like osmosis. I really wasn't totally paying attention, but it was seeping into me at some level. And so that's kind of the moment. And, and I'm very thankful for that. And then I got a wildlife biology degree here at the University of Montana. And then started volunteering really for the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership way back in the day. And this is when they first started. And so I was very lucky to be with them at the beginning. But that moment, I think, was that mountain lion. Since you ask, I think it was that mountain lion. It was, and now that I think about it, it was such a powerful moment. And where I sit right now, it's about 1.5 miles away from me. And thank you for even making me think about it.
Yeah. Well, I think when it comes down to it, we kind of all have these kind of moments if you're in this world, right, of conservation or sustainability just to kind of share a similar story, which is on topic for public lands and waters for today. For me, I was standing in the middle of the river fly fishing, and had kind of started to understand entomology and the life cycle stages of aquatic insects.
Yeah.
And it was just sort of like the light bulb went off that this was all interconnected, that nature was interconnected. Our businesses are interconnected with nature. We are interconnected with nature. We are part of nature. And so I think we all, and I would encourage anyone listening to think about like, what are those moments? Because it's kind of cool I've been thinking a lot about public lands, prepping for this interview, and was just like, what was that moment for me? And so I think it's really, really important that we all understand what we're fighting for. So I certainly have enjoyed being able to spend a lot of time on public lands, and um, I want to protect what I love, and so that's kind of my motivation. And I'm curious, or maybe not curious, but I'd like to get your take. We'll kind of dive in here on what is the state of America's public lands. We'll have to date this. This is April 11th.
Yeah.
At 10:08 a.m. Eastern, because things seem to be changing and happening rapidly. But could you please address what's happening with public lands today?
Absolutely. And I think before I do that, I think, you talk about your moment on the river. And I think that, I had this moment with a mountain lion. I was in a car, but like you're on the river. I think about all these, moments that we have had in the woods and on the water. And that to me, fundamentally is what we're trying to protect. Like, I think there's many other things about our public lands and our public waters, but it's these moments that really you can't necessarily describe all the way, but are just so important to us in our lives that provide us solace in particular. When you think about everything that's going on right now, I mean, the pandemic, when that happened, I found my peace outside. And whether that was a walk around the block in my neighborhood or that was, going hunting or fishing in the woods, like that, it's so important to us. And I don't think we can underscore that. I think there's many other things that are important about our public lands, but I think those kind of moments, what you describe, how you connect with something that's bigger than you, is just like super impressive. So right now, in my 25-year career, this is the biggest threat that we've ever faced for our public lands and public waters. And I don't want to overplay that, but I also want everybody to understand who's listening to this, how important this exact moment in time is. And I think that the threats are real. I think people are saying things out loud that they've never said out loud before on the privatization of our public lands. It's always kind of been something that's been in the back of people's minds because there's a lot of money to be made through the privatization of these public lands that belong to you and I and every single American. All 330 million plus of us own 640 million acres of public land, which is absolutely like I grew up here in Montana. My family's been here since the 1870s, but we did not have a ranch, right? Like I don't have a ranch, this big, huge property that I can go to, but I got, a plethora of places that I can go that is my kingdom, that is your kingdom too. You can come to Montana and use these lands and waters just like I do. And so that's what's at stake. But right now, I guess I'll go back to January to start. I'll kind of do this chronologically a little bit. But in January, the first action that the House took is they always look at the House rules. Like this is the House, this is Congress, just so everybody understands. So these are the elected folks. And the first thing that they do is they kind of go through the rules. And one of the things that they slipped in there is that public lands, you didn't have to consider the value of public lands if you were going to sell or transfer them. So when I think about the value of public lands, and they don't have to consider them, sure, there's like the actual, what that's worth just property-wise, which is astronomical, especially in some of these places where these public lands are. Then you look at the outdoor economy, and that's $1 trillion, and so like our public lands are the cornerstone of that outdoor economy. So that's a big number, $1 trillion. Then you think about clean air and clean water, and clean water. You fish, but 70% of our streams start on public lands, and that is our clean water. That belongs to us, and to me, put a price tag on that. I don't even know what that is, right? Like, and I think like clean air on top of that, which, our public lands provide a ton of because of, just the nature of the habitat that they provide. So when you say that you don't have to consider the value of these public lands, that's a huge red flag, right? Like these, again, they belong to all of us, but you're not considering that. So that's a piece. I think then you have, you have Senator Mike Lee from Utah, who is now in charge of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee in the Senate. He has been the number one opponent of public lands. Like he wants to get rid of public lands, and he's been doing this in his career. This isn't something that happened yesterday. Go ahead.
Sorry, you're right. Wasn't he the same one in the 2016 Trump presidency that was pushing for Utah to privatize public
So
lands?
that was Congressman Chaffetz. I think Mike Lee
excuse
was
me.
behind it, like
Yeah.
as well, but Congressman Chaffetz, and it's a great story that you bring up because he got his ass handed to him.
Yeah.
He proposed a bill to sell 3 million acres of public land. That's when I was working for Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, and it was, I think Facebook was starting to do, maybe it was like Instagram was starting to do like live kind of stuff, and so they were really promoting it, and so we did I think Facebook Live right after that. Tons of people, I think 500,000 people watched that. Stephen Ranella picked that up, Joe Rogan picked that up, and ultimately a bunch of people went to Congressman Chaffetz's Instagram site, which was brand new kind of at that point, and just put comments, like 30 comments on posts going back like 6 months. And so he got the message, and ultimately he pulled that bill within a week, which I've never seen ever, where somebody sponsors a bill. Like, I've never seen that in my career at all, where somebody sponsors a bill and they pull their support from it in a week. And then he did it in a post. It was kind of funny. He was wearing all camo and then holding this dog that obviously didn't hunt. Like, it was like, and I've never taken a picture where I'm holding my dog that hunts, and like I'm for hunting. But he came out and he listened to the people, which is what they're supposed to do. Like, ultimately, democracy, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And so we, the people, when we voice our opinion, they should listen. And in this case, he did. And I give him a lot of credit for that. But thank you for bringing that up. So Mike Lee now, I mean, he's from Utah. And he really wants to divest, which was basically get rid of public lands. But at the same time, there was a lawsuit from the governor of Utah that wanted to wrest 18 million acres of public land in Utah to the state of Utah. And this was Bureau of Land Management land, and they petitioned the Supreme Court. So U.S. Supreme Court goes all the way to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court says, no, this is not something that we want to deal with. They didn't say they didn't think it had merits. They just said this is not something we want to deal with right now. And so they stopped that, and which was a great victory, I think, for public lands. But they also have a multi-million-dollar ad campaign that is behind this lawsuit. And nobody puts lawsuits, they don't put a $5 million ad campaign behind a lawsuit that goes to the Supreme Court. That just doesn't happen, because the Supreme Court should be, insular to that kind of stuff. What that was about was changing hearts and minds. And so the hearts and minds piece of that is that 13 other states signed on to this lawsuit as far as an amicus brief, which basically means a friend of the court. So they're in support of this. So that's 13 states. One of those is North Dakota, where Secretary Burgum, the Interior Secretary, comes from right now. And they were super supportive. Their senators are super supportive of this. And so this idea of hearts and minds, the idea that you're going to sell public lands, either pay off, the national debt, or, to stoke economic growth, is becoming more prevalent. So that's a major one. We won that. Again, the Supreme Court said no. That could come back at a lower court level. They could put it there, but really it's about changing hearts and minds. And so that one to me was just crazy. Then I guess I would go into this idea that the administration is talking about, and it's energy domination. And energy domination, I get it economically a little bit. That helps us in the world. But when Theodore Roosevelt really back in the early 1900s started setting aside these public lands, that was because at that point it was timber harvest, and they were raping and pillaging our forests. And they were doing that for quick dollars, economic growth again, but for a small amount of people in a really short time. And Roosevelt said, hey, these public lands, are important to all of us. Let's make sure that we do this sustainably. So we can still cut trees, we can still harvest, or we can still, drill for oil. We can get minerals out of these public lands. Make sure that that's sustainable throughout time, so we don't just do it all at once. And so that's when he started setting up these national forests. And now when I hear energy dominance, it's we're right back there again. It's why do we want to make a bunch of money quickly to rape and pillage our public lands versus do that sustainably? Energy independence, I'm down with, right? Let's figure out how we sustainably manage these oil and gas resources, these, mineral deposits. How do we do that? So it's we can clean up what we're doing as we go. and we can kind of have this for a long time, right? For the most amount of people. That's what conservation really is like the best use for the longest amount of time for the most amount of people. And so how do we do that? And energy dominance doesn't make any sense to me. So I think that's like a key point in this whole thing. I think that, you get to The Purge, right? I call it The Purge. And I don't know if you've watched that movie. It's not great. But it's the purge of the workforce for our public lands has been like pretty embarrassing as well, right? Our public lands are already underfunded and they're understaffed. And so when you start purging 10%, now 20%, they're talking about next week. I mean, we're April 11th, as you said. They're talking next week that up to 50% of our public land agencies, like management, that is going to essentially just dismantle our public land agencies. They're not going to be able to do their jobs. And so, that purge, sure, it hurt for people. And anybody that's listening to this as a federal employee that has been on the front lines of conservation, I thank you for your work. You did not probably get properly paid for that work, but you did it because you loved it. And I have so much respect for you. It's a very hard job. And to lose your job in the way that happened, they were fired. And then it said that they were, it was because they weren't doing their jobs correctly. Man, these were people that had spent their, either their young lives or their long lives doing just amazing work. And so they're on the front lines of conservation. My heart goes out to them. But I think that the other piece of this is, again, they're trying to dismantle, then defund, and then divest our public lands. And so when you take away the workforce that can do the job, of course, we're all going to be out there this next spring and be like, man, this is not working. And that next idea is then maybe we should privatize this. And if we privatize it, we never get that back. And I think that this idea of, I think Ken Burns, talked about our national parks as our, as our greatest idea as America. I would say our public lands are our greatest idea. And so not just national parks, but our national wildlife refuges, our Forest Service lands, Bureau of Land Management, all these places that we can go, again, 640 million acres that we can all go, that it doesn't cost us really a dime. I mean, I think taxes is like, a couple dollars per person that really is to manage these lands. But that's like our birthright. And so that's at stake. So the purge was huge. And I think, something that we commented on yesterday with that purge is that the waterfowl, I'm a big waterfowl hunter. Like I love hunting ducks. And I've done that growing up. It's like the way I connect. It's the way, I told you about my father passed away when I was 19. It's a way for me to connect to him when I'm out in the woods, because that's something we did all the time. Well, they have to do a waterfowl survey every single year. It's in law. It says how many ducks that you have. So they fly these airplanes over, like the prairie pothole region, in particular up in Montana, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, a little bit up in Alberta. They see how many ducks are actually on the water. They call that the duck factory. This is where we make the ducks, because there's all these little potholes. They do this survey every single year. And now they don't have the pilots to go do this because they fired them. And so they don't have the pilots to do that, which means they can't do the survey, which if you can't do the survey by law, you can't have a duck season because you don't know how many ducks are out there. Like you want to know how many ducks are on the ground. And so you can say like how many ducks you can kill. And so they can't do that this next year. And that's a direct result. Now, I don't think Doge and these, 20-year-olds or whatever that are making the cuts knew about what the impacts of that were. And so hopefully by making a little bit of noise, we, the people, can say, hey, this is going to be a problem this next fall when we want to start hunting ducks. Like here in Montana, it's in October. I know in Louisiana, it's like in September. But so let's say it starts in September. We got to have these surveys now, though, to be able to do that duck, to figure out what the duck season will look like. And I hope that, the people will kind of push back and say no. But that's just one that, we talked about yesterday that is an actual implication. Last thing I guess I would say, and then stop rambling, but so there's this thing called reconciliation, which is, it's very complicated. It's how the budget actually for the federal government is put together. And how we kind of, I would say, balance that. And during reconciliation, there was a bunch of talk that started that they wanted to start, selling public lands to pay off the $1 trillion tax cut for folks that make over $1 million. And we got wind of that. Others got wind of that. We pushed back against it. Senator Heinrich from New Mexico, Senator Hickenlooper from Colorado put forward a amendment during that said you cannot sell public lands to pay off or to balance the budget, basically. And they rallied a bunch of people, both senators from Montana, Senator Daines, Senator Sheehy. Sheehy's new, voted in favor of this, which I thank them for. But 51 senators voted against this, which means they think again, that hearts and minds thing I talked about earlier with Utah. They think that it's okay to start selling public lands to balance our budget. And to me, that is a very scary, scary place, because if you start doing that, that's a one-time deal, right? And you're also messing around with that $1 trillion kind of outdoor economy. You're messing around with clean air, clean water, like lots of things for a short-term gain. And so 51 senators voted for that. While I say I'm really excited about my two senators from Montana, Senator Daines and Senator Sheehy, could you not get two more people to flip on this? How hard did you work on this? And so while I support them, I'm not letting them off the hook either, right? You could have done that. And so now that's in the reconciliation. So it doesn't explicitly say that they are going to sell public lands to pay, to balance the budget, but it also didn't preclude it. And that's what that amendment would have done, was it precluded it. So I say all this stuff to you, and that's a lot, but the pressures in my 25-year career, and I could talk about more, but are more extreme right now than they ever have been. And I talk to people, I say I'm 50 years old. I talk to people that are 75 or 80 years old that have been in this game longer than me. And they all say this is the biggest threat that they've ever seen. And to me, that means wake the fuck up. But it also means that we, the people, can coalesce, right? And I think about, how do we use this moment to bring people together to not only fight what's going on right now, but also to get things that would be good for conservation, good for hunting, good for fishing, just good for the people in general. And I think that's my silver lining about all this, is that I think that the apathy is very present in the hunting and angling ranks. And sometimes you got to get punched in the mouth a little bit, and then you kind of wake up and you're like, oh, well, maybe we should be doing something about this. And I think that's the really silver lining to everything I just said, is I think that people are starting to pay attention. And when they pay attention, not only can we stop bad stuff, but I think we can use that energy to do good stuff as well.
Yeah, and I'll just say I live in Charleston, South Carolina, and I saw your social post, went on there. It got me activated. I looked and saw Senator Lindsey Graham, Senator Tim Scott were both from South Carolina and were of the 51 senators that supported that. So I have reached out to them. I would encourage, I've got some listeners here in South Carolina, even though this has happened, to still reach out to them, call them, email them, message them, tell them that you completely disagree with this as a hunter or an angler, or a South Carolinian, or someone who just enjoys spending time with your family, camping, whatever it is on public lands. It's crazy. It almost, as you were explaining all this, I was kind of thinking about what we were talking about earlier, that aha moment or that story, or how you connect. And it kind of is this is a systematic disconnect with nature, where it's if you get the people so disconnected to where they're not aware of these things, or maybe they haven't been lucky to have an experience where they had a deep spiritual or some type of connection in nature, that they're willing to fight for it, that you could get something like this passed without anyone noticing, because they don't use the resource. So they go, I don't know. I don't know what's at stake. But if you do use the resource, you know exactly what's at stake.
I think you're spot on there. And then another thing I would guess I'd just reiterate is that you took action. And, a lot of people in this country right now are pretty fed up with our federal government in general, our elected officials in general. And they think their voice doesn't count. They think that billionaires, Elon Musk and Doge is running the frickin' show. And it is true. but our voice doesn't really count if we don't use it, right? And so what you just did is you used your voice, and that plus other people using their voice, like democracy, like the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And like the only way that like we the people, we're not billionaires. I'm not a billionaire. I mean, I told you I don't even have a ranch here in Montana, right? Like, I live off of the things that belong to all of us. But what I do have is I have a voice, and you have a voice, and everybody listening to this has a voice. And collectively, if we start using our voices, that's the way democracy works. And so, sure, we might have some things that are bad in front of us right now, but if we continue to speak up, I think the politicians are going to listen to us. That's my glass half full. Like I really do think that that's the way things work in this country. But you can't just bitch about it on the sidelines. You got to do things like you did. Like you got to make sure, like contact them on social media. Like I think that's a great way because it breaks through the noise. But picking up the phone is probably one of the best things to do, and call these folks and say, keep public lands in public hands. It can be just like a simple message like that. Sure, you can get into like any issue that we're talking about today and be specific. But I think that idea of just saying, keep public lands in public hands and making sure that they think that over and over again, that message is simple and it gets to them. And I think, when they make decisions, then they got to realize that whatever decisions they're making, that they have to think about, their constituents. They ultimately have to think about that next election. And I hate the way that sounds, but like politics, man, like it's a blood sport, and the next election is really going to be an opportunity for the people to speak. And, that's maybe on a bunch of other issues, but public lands in particular, and public water and public wildlife. And so how do we get them, and maybe they get elected again, but, at that point, they got to start making promises to people that they're not going to mess with our stuff. And we remember that. And so we can hold them accountable. And I think that is the way our system works. And so, that's one of the things that American Hunters and Anglers that we're super focused on is really, educating the people, activating the people. And that goes for right now, but that goes for 2 years in this midterm, and that goes for 4 years when the presidential election is again. So it's important for everybody, I think, to engage in that process.
Well, let me ask you this. And I mean, you've spent your entire career in conservation, and I have seen it in sort of bits and pieces with different conservation groups, but I'm curious, what is your opinion, and maybe you already just explained it, but
yeah.
What is your opinion of the most effective way to get your voice heard with elected officials? I'll give you an example that's kind of down where I live is Captains for Clean Water. They've done a real good job in Florida of getting the attention of lawmakers. Totally. Where they're like, hey, I will show up at your office and we're going to talk about this because you work for us.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm curious, in your opinion, what are some of the best strategies, or what has worked well that you have seen in your career?
It's a great question. So you mentioned something already that I think is like the best way. And sorry, somebody just showed up at my house, so you're going to hear the dogs potentially in the background. But I think the most effective is one-on-one. And I call those intercepts, right? And so whether that's like they're having a fundraising event, or, where they go get coffee when they're back home, or you go out to Washington, D.C., which is hard for a bunch of people. South Carolina, you're a little bit closer than Montana, so you can actually drive up there. It's a long drive, but you can do it. But talking to them individually, I think, is really important because they want to hear your story. They want to hear why this means to you. Why it's important to you. I think after that, I already mentioned, like, phone calls, I think, are the second best. And they don't, these offices, they don't get a lot of phone calls because people don't pick up the phone anymore. And so if you get 100 calls about an issue, like, that's a big freaking deal. Now, I've been a part of things where, like, you can do paid, like, calls where you're, talking to an individual, then they get connected to their senator. You talk to chiefs of staff, they can tell when that stuff happens, right? Like, it's like all of a sudden we get 20 phone calls in a day. The next day it's like over. Like, like that strategy, they know it's getting turned on. But like, if you're calling just as an individual and not being asked to, I think that's a super effective way to affect them. I think that, emails are not that effective, and we all do it, right? It's really easy to do. You'll get, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, National Wildlife Federation, like name the organization, Child Unlimited, whoever it is, like you can push that email. And I don't say don't do that, because I think it is important at some level, but like they basically file all that as like one comment, when they're reporting back to the boss. They get that and they're like, hey, we got 50 emails today, but it was all kind of like this like boilerplate kind of language, and so they know that it's kind of coming from one place. And so emails, while I'm not going to discourage people from doing that, I think it's not that effective. And then the thing that I mentioned earlier is social media. And I think the social media, I talked about the Chaffetz kind of like example, where people started commenting, on his posts that had nothing to do with the sale of public lands, but were like, hey, keep public lands in public hands. And they did that going back 6 months. And so his staff is seeing all that, and they're like, oh my God. And it's a place still. I mean, we did this last week with Congressman Westerman from Arkansas that basically was, he said something about supporting this public land sale. And so, we're pretty small right now, but like, we got 6-7 people to go onto his post and basically say, keep public lands in public hands. And so like, it's an effective way right now. I think individual like messages, that you can do on Instagram or like Facebook to them, I think is really important. I would put that in front of emails like every single day, because it's just different, right? Like it's different. It's not boilerplate. You're talking about your story. Then the last thing I think you can do is really tell this story to your friends, your family. All of us have social media at some level, and like you can go out into the woods and talk about what this means to you. And just by sharing your story, I think, it connects, and maybe people don't have that spiritual moment like what you and I have talked about. I mean, I will tell you that when I'm out in the woods, my father again died when I was 19, but I feel closer to him when I'm out in the woods than any other place. And like he's around the next corner on that, when I'm fishing, he's just around the next corner, and I keep wanting to see him, but he's not there. When I'm hunting, he's over the next ridge, and I'm just like climbing that ridge. But it's like these are these moments, and when you tell your elected officials about those places and those things that you experience when you're out there, I think it's super effective, because it's real, and they can identify with that. Either they've had that experience or they had something different that they can identify with. So I think that last piece is just about telling your story to your friends, your family, and then on social media, which is like a bigger friends and family, is just telling that story and being creative about it. And if we all do, 1 or 2 or 3 of these things, I believe in the people. I really believe in the people. And while I think that the threats are larger than we've ever seen them, I also think that, this is an opportunity to unite the people, and that we can push back against this stuff, and not only push back against it, but then be better for it on proactive things. So.
Well, you got my wheels turning, because now I'm thinking I need to take my senators fishing on public land, and
that'd be amazing. That'd be amazing.
And you go, look, this means a lot to a lot of people. This is what it means to me, and personalize that story. And it's I don't know. I just, in some ways I feel really lucky, and in some ways I feel really bad if there are this many Americans who have not had the types of experiences that we've been lucky to have. It's and even in South Carolina, I mean, we're not Montana, but we've got plenty of public land available. And it's like, it's something that I utilize and I value, and I take my family and we spend time on, and it's like, yeah, it's ours. I mean,
I don't know a ton about South Carolina, but I do know that you also have a bunch of waterfront too, right? And idea that like you have, no matter who you are, has public access to like those beaches, and can fish out there, can like picnic out there, can walk out there, just chill out there. Like what a gift that is to us, right? And I think that what I would also, make your listeners think about is that none of this happened by accident. It wasn't like, like this has been this way forever. It's been this way because people said, we want this to belong to the people. We want America to be different than Europe in particular. In Europe, it is the king's game, they call it, right? Like the king's game. And that's fish, and that's wildlife. And by penalty of death, like in some cases, if you took a deer or if you took a fish, you would be like put up, you'd be hung because that was the king's game. And in the United States, we said, you know what? This wildlife belongs to the people. We want it to belong to the people because that is a very democratic kind of thing. And on top of that, then we're going to provide the public spaces for the people to go to enjoy these wildlife. And so to me, South Carolina, you think about that coast in particular, how important that is. And I'm guaranteeing you that there's people that have a lot of money that don't like to see the riffraff out front of their really expensive houses on those beaches. And they're trying to fight, like beach access in particular, right? And so what do? Well, we the people, we say, hey, it's awesome that you have this $1 million place behind us, but we and you own this out front, and that's how we take care of this. And I think that connection that you get in the outdoors is how we protect the outdoors as well. If we, the people, stop going in the outdoors, then it's not as important to us anymore. And sure, we'll cede it to the wealthy and the few. But I think that the more opportunity that we have to get out there, and that's what that access kind of piece is, and enjoy this stuff, that we will defend it, every single time. So South Carolina, I'm in North Carolina, just north of you. I've been in the Pisgah. I think that's how you say it, is that like the national
Pisgah.
Forest.
Yeah,
and
beautiful.
It is vast. Like it is vast, and so I think, in a place like Montana where maybe that's what you think, that's where public lands are. Yes, I have stuff literally right outside my door that I can go to. But when you go to a place like South Carolina where maybe you have less, it becomes that much more important too, right? And how do we, again, make sure that's managed in the right way? But how do we keep that in public hands? And I think that's like what the conversation is. Like you look at that public lands map, and sure, a lot of it's in the West. But again, I mentioned North Carolina. We were talking about South Carolina. You go up to Pennsylvania, New York, Maine. Florida has a ton of public lands. All these places you talked about, Captains for Clean Water. Those guys are going out on public water, right? And there's a bunch of problems that are happening internally, which is a whole nother discussion. But they're on public water because that has been made that way, so it's available to all of us. And really, we have to hold on to that. And I think that has to happen in your hometown. But I would also say that you in South Carolina, you own like the Bob Marshall, which is 1.1 million acres, which is one of my favorite places to go hunt and fish. It's about 45 minutes from me right now. You own that just like I do, and you may never go there, but you can dream about it. And that clean air and that clean water that comes out of there, you're benefiting from it. And so no matter where you are in the country, no matter who, where your listeners are from, this public land belongs to all of us. And that is like a special, special, special thing.
Well, and you say this, and it kind of brings it back to the interconnection, right? It's like that clean air that the Bob Bob
Marshall,
Bob Marshall produces is our air too, and it helps clean our air, and that's connected, and I think when people start to, or at least for me, start thinking about how interconnected everything is, and you start to realize like this is all we're all in this larger system, right? Yep. And if we don't protect areas for conservation purposes that provide these services that for free, clean air, clean water, fish, game, the whole deal, it affects the entire system, and so and not the right way. And so keeping these lands in public hands is certainly paramount as world population continues to grow and these places become more precious. So it's so anyway, I'm just kicking a dead horse here, but it's just like I can't. I was infuriated earlier this week when I saw my senators' names on this list. I mean, I was pissed.
And you should be.
Yeah, I mean, it's mind blowing.
And I don't want to get too like weird about this, but I will say there's an author. His name's Jared Diamond. He
Yeah.
wrote this book, and it's called Collapse.
Yeah.
And he looks at all these societies that kind of fell apart, right? And part of the reason not part of the reason, the basically the book is that they just took away their natural resources, right? Now, Easter Island is one of the examples, that's out, off of Chile. They cut down all the trees, right? And there's all these big, stone heads there now, of the society that was there that was super smart, but they just they took away all their resources. So that's one. The one that I love the best though is thinking about like Mesopotamia, right? Like Iraq, Iran, kind of, it was super lush. And again, they destroyed all of their, of their kind of natural resources because of all the people that were there. And now they're fighting over like sand. And like that wasn't the way it was, And so here in the United States, let's learn from this stuff and realize that these natural resources that we have, back to Theodore Roosevelt that I talked about earlier, let's do it for the most people for the longest amount of time, right? And so if we sustain these natural resources, we can be the most powerful, biggest society in the world. But let's not decimate that stuff, right? Let's do it. Like we can take from that resource, but as long as we're giving back and doing it in a sustainable fashion. And so, that book in particular, I think to me, this resonates because, the United States, our history is pretty damn young, right? Like we're not really that old of a country. Conservation generally is about 1870s it started in this country, and so 150 years old. Like that's not a long amount of time. And so what are we going to do going forward? Like all the stuff that, you and I are talking about today, it's for these next generations to actually fight for, and sustain after us. But our jobs is to make sure that it's either at the same level or even better than what we got it, right? And so to me, this juxtaposition in time, sure, there's a lot of threats, but my kids, my grandkids, they're going to be fighting for the same shit as it becomes more precious. And this idea, again, going back to Jared Diamond and Collapse, this pressure to privatize our natural resources is going to continue. It's going to get even more extreme as our population grows and demands grow. And so how are we going to treat those natural resources? And again, I think we can learn from the history, and we can think about, the great leaders like Theodore Roosevelt and many others that came before us that helped us get what we have today. And then what are we going to do right now to make sure that, those other folks have something to fight for?
Love it. All right. Well, I do want to ask you this, Lan, because now I'm fired up. But I do want to ask. What we've talked about the issue with public lands, and they're under pretty serious threat right now. We talked about what you can do and what's most effective in your opinion. And I'm curious if there are any, we've talked about some other organizations, but what is a story of hope, or what is something that you've seen work really well? And maybe it goes back to the Chavitz, Utah thing, but what is a conservation home run that has inspired you, I guess is the question, that has worked?
It's a really good question. So I guess I'm going to say probably two things. I think the first one is look back at like the dirty 30s, right? Like, so the Dust Bowl is happening, the lid came off the prairie, wildlife is in trouble, our country is in trouble, unsustainable farming practices led to all of this. Like we did it. Like this is that collapse kind of thing that Jared Diamond talked about. So we had a big problem. But what did we do? Through Pittman-Robertson, the Pittman-Robertson dollars, which is excise taxes on guns and ammunition. We did that in the 1930s, which goes back to like this money goes from the purchase of guns and ammunition, goes back to conservation. It goes back to state agencies in particular to help manage these lands. The same time, you had Ducks Unlimited that was formed. You had the Duck Stamp that was formed. The Duck Stamp is something you have to buy every single year to hunt migratory waterfowl. That money, I think it generates, it's generated over $1 billion. It generates hundreds of millions of dollars every single year. It goes back to the management of national wildlife refuges. You had National Wildlife Federation that was formed at that point. You had the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that was formed at that point. We got our shit together out of something that was really bad that was happening. So I use that example as a historical, is that was a big, big problem for wildlife at that point. And we, the people, hunters and anglers, now Wallop Bro and Dingle Johnson was after, which is the fishing side of things. And so that happened, I think, in like maybe in the 50s. Don't quote me on that, but I think it was a little bit later. But at the same time, they were like, hey, we want to give back to this resource. And so we're gonna tax not only like our fishing equipment, but we're also going to tax like a boat like fuel, right? Like when you're putting like gas in your boat, there's a little teeny tax that goes in there. Not only does that go to like conservation, but it also goes to access as well. And so we've decided that we want to give back. And so out of these bad times came some really good. So I give you that example. I think that more contemporary example I would give you would be the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So Land and Water Conservation Fund was established in 1964. It was because there was oil and gas development happening in the Gulf of Mexico in particular. And at that point, senators were like, we know this is going to have impacts to wildlife and conservation. Let's take some excise taxes again from this oil and gas development that's happening and put that back to conservation. And so back in 1964, that was established. It was authorized at $900 million. Never really realized that $900 million. You had to go back to the appropriations process. This is getting way into the weeds, but it's in the appropriations process where you have to go back and ask senators, hey, this has been appropriated at this point, spend that money this way. They were like, we want to spend some of that money in the Treasury. Well, in my career, when I started in 2000, which is really when I started, like we were working on trying to get full and dedicated funding for the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And so we worked, every single year, go back to your appropriations process, and you're trying to get, 300 million or 400 million, and that was distributed to all 50 states. It's been awesome for access. If you have a golf course or a swimming pool in rural America, is probably paid for by the Land and Water Conservation Fund because they don't have the funds to do that at a rural level. So not only did it do like local things, but did big conservation things as well. So it's a great program, but it was not fully funded. And so, we worked really hard here in Montana in particular to educate our senators. Senator Daines at first was against this. He didn't want us to purchase any more, public land. He thought that was not a good idea. He thought that money should be used in particular after the oil spill down in Louisiana for like training and secure, safety stuff for oil and gas workers, which is important, but that's not what this money was for. And so there was a lot of education that happened. And I would say that education was aggressive at some points, right? Like Mr. Daines, like you need to do a better job. And then he was up for re-election here in Montana. And he realized that public lands, Land and Water Conservation Fund in particular, was an issue that if he was behind, his constituents were going to support him. And so he became a champion of this, went to President Trump, who had zeroed out the Land and Water Conservation Fund in his budget. Like, let's just think about that, right? Like zeroed it out and said, we're not going to take any of that money for conservation. We're going to put all that into the Treasury. But he went to President Trump and said, this is an important issue. Him and Senator Gardner from Colorado, who was also running. And they went to the president. I think they even met in the White House and said, we need this to win our elections. And at that point, Trump was like, oh, winning elections, got it. And so he then was like, okay, get me a bill on my desk and I'll sign it. And so at that point, the politics changed. And, all the people that have been educated and everything could tell their senators this was a good idea. When I was working for Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, I think we generated like 20,000 phone calls in a month, to out to DC. And ultimately that bill was passed and President Trump signed it into law. That is a story of the president going from, I think this is a dumb idea, zeroing that out, to politics actually making that happen to where he signed that like actual legislation. So now, which is absolutely amazing, we have $900 million in perpetuity going forward, as long as oil and gas development is happening in the Gulf of Mexico, that's going to go towards, access and conservation in this country. That did not happen by accident. That wasn't, again, hey, that was a great idea in 1964. Remember, like we were trying to get that money every single year. Then we had to pass legislation that actually said, no, this is dedicated funding. It's going to be $900 million in perpetuity. That didn't happen by accident. And again, Senator Daines felt some pain about that in this state. But then when he did the right thing, he also felt a lot of congratulations. Like I think the entire conservation community, hunters, anglers, hikers, kayakers, bikers, whoever they were, gave him the props that he deserved because he became a champion. And that to me is the way democracy should work. And so when I think about those two examples, is that the people's voice still matters, and that out of some bad can come some good. And so right now, the threats are dire. They feel really extreme, but how do we push back against that? And how do we, ignite the people? And so that not only do we push back against the bad stuff, that we can get some good stuff. And, my good stuff, I'm going to throw this one in here. And I get in trouble for saying this, but I also think it's a really good idea, is that I talk about the excise taxes on guns and ammunition, on fishing equipment. You have it on bow equipment. But we do not have it on kayaks, bikes. We don't have it on hiking boots. We don't have it on binoculars. In general, it's called a backpack tax. I call it maybe an outdoor opportunity fund. Yeah. Is that, I do all those things too. I got a kayak out in my, I got a mountain bike out in my garage. I am more than willing to pay, let's say even 1% of what I bought that bike for, that kayak for, and know that that's going for conservation. These are people, the outdoor economy that I talk about, the $1 trillion. Hunting and fishing is either staying flat, maybe even goes down a little bit, right? But like that other part of the outdoor economy is going up because people are understanding how, much it means to them. How do we not only make money off of that, but when I talk about Pittman Robertson or Dingle Johnson, like I wear it on my chest. Like I'm so proud that we are giving back to this resource. I want the people that are mountain biking and kayaking and, and hiking and bird watching to feel the same freaking thing. And so this is a way to do that. And so the money is important for sure. But I think it's also about this ethos about who we are as Americans and what do we value and what do we want to protect. And one of the ways you could do that is through this outdoor opportunity fund, or in short terms, like a backpack tax. And so I think, we're not in a great place for a lot of those companies because of all the tariffs right now. But I also think, okay, we got these tariffs. Let's go fricking use some of that money to put it back into conservation and dedicate it to that piece. And have that, happen in perpetuity. And I think it'd be a great gift to the American people. And I think the people, when I think about outdoor users, again, 1 or 2% off of $1,000 kayak or, a $2,500 mountain bike, like they're going to love it. And it's going to be great marketing as well for these companies. And so that's one of the ones that I, again, I get in trouble because it's because these big companies are worried about their bottom line. And, especially right now with these tariffs, I get it. But I also think that it's great for marketing and the people would love it, and it'd be a great way to give back. So that's one of, I think, the silver lines that we could have.
Love it. Well, we're about out of time, but I'll do rapid fire because we really didn't talk hunting and fishing. Yeah. So favorite animal or species to hunt? I think you alluded to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
I mean, it's waterfowl.
Yeah.
I mean, I got a black lab. I grew up, hunting with black labs. I could sit on a marsh and not even have a gun and just watch these ducks come in, and like the way they fold their wings and they kind of do that little thing before they land. Like I could watch that every single day, all day. But what I really love is watching the dogs work. I also love duck hunting because you don't have to be quiet all the time. And I'm a big talker, but I've had my best experiences with my kids have been in the duck blind, where we can have conversations and all of a sudden you're like, shh, quiet, there's birds working, kind of like get down, you're blowing on that duck call. So that, yeah, I love all sorts of things. But duck hunting, I think if I can only do one, that would be the one that I want to do.
All right. What about fishing? Favorite species to catch?
Cutthroat trout, hands down. Native to Montana. Awesome, like little red slash. That they have. They look a little bit like rainbows, but these are native fish. In my home water, there's a spot where brown trout are definitely at, and we whack the shit out of them because one, they're delicious to eat, but also the more big browns that you're killing, they're not eating as much as these cutthroats. And I've watched that cutthroat population get bigger in the years that you can take 3 brown trout. Yeah. And so cutthroats on my home water every single day. They're voracious. They might not be the biggest fish, but they're voracious when they take, and they're just gorgeous. And I love where they're at. Cool.
Well, Land, I can't thank you enough for dedicating your career to conservation and like I said, when we got things kicked off, I've wanted to talk conservation with you for a long time, and I'm glad we got the opportunity to do that. And I hope that this podcast helps influence some anglers in South Carolina and beyond to reach out to their elected officials. If you can't do it in person, sounds like the second best way is over the phone. And just bare minimum zero effort would be to send the email, but we really need to be picking up the phone and telling our stories, it sounds like. So where can people learn more about American hunters and anglers and keep up with what y'all are doing? Like I said, if it wasn't for your social post, I don't know that I would have known this week that my senators were one of those 51. So where can folks get some more info there?
So website is nolandgrab.com, which I love that we got. It's really easy to remember too. You can also find us at AmericanHuntersAnglers.org, but nolandgrab.com gets you right to that website. And then Instagram is like what you alluded to, social media. That's what we're doing pretty much you can do it every single day, right? So that's like, we work on that a lot. That's just American Hunters Anglers. And you'll find us, we're growing every single day. We punch way above our weight right now. We've had some viral videos that have gone, and I think our best one is like 70,000 views or something. And for 2,700 followers that we have, I think at this moment, like that's pretty awesome. And it's because the people are, like watching, like you just said. And so I think follow us, share our stuff. And then, man, like this podcast is part of this telling the story and educating people, right? And so I'm so thankful that you reached out to me and wanted to have me on, because I think that, yes, we can learn things in 60 to 90 seconds that is on social media, but we talked way broader than that today. And I hope that, whoever's listening to this digests it, but then also is inspired to action, because at the end of the day, we, the people, are who run democracy, and we just got to show up. And that's, really what this moment is about.
All right. Special thanks to Land and American Hunters and Anglers for all they are doing to protect our public lands. If you enjoyed this episode, an absolutely free way to support the show is by leaving it a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. It's a chance to tell me what you love about the show, and it helps others discover it too. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for new episodes dropping every month.